Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you all for coming this morning. The task force was a group of leaders from across the sectors, set up 18 months or so ago to consider the question, how do we build a society that prevents problems from occurring rather than one that copes with the consequences? And almost exactly a year ago, we set out some ideas in this report, the triple dividend, and then today we are following that up with a rather more thoughtful and reflective piece of work, thinking about how those ideas have played out over the course of the last year. In the triple dividend, we pictured a ready-for-everything community at the top of a cliff. Here, universal services, clear rules would equip us to flourish, they'd protect us from harm, and they would prepare us for change. We suggested that fences or prompt interventions at the cliff edge responded early to problems, which, if not forestalled, could lead to more serious difficulties. And then, further down the cliff face, those interventions become more focused on crisis. Less likely to be totally successful, very likely to cost more. We thought that captured the wisdom of early action and the value of developing from a society that waits for trouble and pays the price to one that prevents and so reaps a triple dividend. Thriving lives, costing less and contributing more. This year we begin the report by revisiting that cliff and suggesting that it has taken a battering from storms in the global economy over the last 12 months, eroding jobs, incomes and opportunities. Many individuals, families, communities relatively secure a year, certainly 2 or 3 years ago, are now much closer to the edge. And at the same time, those preventative services, the fences, legal aid, detached youth work, open access play, have been tumbling over. As those services have disappeared, the demand for expensive acute provision has gone up at the bottom of the cliff, and the consequential costs, economic and social, are unaffordable. We suggest that those trajectories are unsustainable, but importantly, they're not inevitable. Early action is a need reduction strategy, reducing future liabilities. It can be done if we choose to do it. And with the biggest cuts in public expenditure still yet to hit the front line, an ongoing spending review and imminent budgets locally and nationally, we suggest this is the deciding time. Prevent today or pay tomorrow. We put forward 30 actions based on the premise that preventing a problem isn't always possible, but when it is possible, it is almost always preferable. And most of those suggestions are about changing structures and systems, about identifying and doing what we do today, what we need to do today in order to make possible what we want to do tomorrow. They are not about layering another programme on top of a failing system. We suggest that too much is expected already of the purely programmatic. The triple dividend will spring from systemic reform, changing the nitty-gritty, not adding to the itty-bitty. You'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to talk about all 30 of those recommendations, but I do just want to pick out a couple of central themes. First, we think, plan, budget, manage, assess, inspect for short-term value, particularly but not exclusively in government. This, we suggest, drives a culture that chooses to pay tomorrow, not prevent today. We recommend application of a 10-year test, routinely applied across government, third sector and other public agencies. Essentially, we suggest that this policy, we suggest that what should be asked is, will this policy reduce need or will it store up problems? If the budget line fails that test, then further work is required. And ultimately, we suggest that that test, that process, should become a statutory duty. Every public body required to formulate and to meet its own version of a 10-year test. Ambitious, unworldly? Well, we think there are UK-wide precedents of comparable measures in other fields. Duties, for instance, have had an impact in changing culture on equality. And we've been working in Wales over the course of the last year with the Welsh Government since the publication of Triple Dividend. And one of the things we've been exploring with them is 10-year tests as a public duty. And I'm delighted to say that their white paper, which will be launched on the 3rd, on Monday, will include exactly that, a duty on all public sector agencies to apply sustainable development principles where early action is identified as a key theme. So ambitious, yes, but unworldly, we think not. We think that the process in the third sector would need to be different, but we think that the case is equally strong. Here, many of us, and many here today, I think, who would probably agree with this, talk about obsolescence, about working for the day when our work will no longer be needed. But quiz ourselves, really test ourselves. What have we really done today, this week, this year, to advance that day? And I think most of us would say, well, actually, what I'm really doing is dealing with the tide of human misery at the front door. I'm not really reducing need in a serious way. We suggest in the report, braver, bolder leadership across the sectors, testing ourselves regularly and honestly. What will be the 10-year consequences of our work today? How are we reducing need? And then we suggest we need to use that 10-year test in government to develop 10-year planning as part of the spending review process. The spending review sets the parameters for planning and budgeting in government, but also much more than that. Its ripples are felt way out beyond Westminster and Whitehall in local authorities, in public agencies across the country, and in the third sector too. It focuses on a short 3-year outlook when we need policies that add up in the longer term. We therefore recommend publication of 10-year spending plans in each spending review. Of course, changing pressures, not least elections, will require plans to be reviewed every 2 to 3 years, but every time, government will consider the longer-term consequences of its decisions and be required to publish them. We know, for instance, how many 12 and 13-year-olds will leave school without basic skills in a couple of years' time. We know the price of that. We know also the cost of reading recovery programmes and the percentage that succeed. A society that applied even a 5-year perspective to its public finances would be investing more in literacy work with school-aged children. Actually, we are investing less and less. This might help to balance the books in a tight 3-year cycle, but it is exactly how not to ensure sustainable public finances, the explicit Treasury goal. And again, there is a precedent for this kind of idea. Government moved from 1 to 3-year spending plans at the end of the 90s, and decisions have often been made which have implications beyond the electoral horizon, pensions, for instance. But there is a radical difference between introducing new policies that may have long-term implications and considering the consequences of every policy over a 10-year period. And the more we've consulted, and particularly across Whitehall on this, the more I have come to believe not only that 10-year plans would be transformational, but more than that really, that without this reform, little else will ever change in inspection regimes, in planning processes, in day-to-day delivery, locally, nationally, across the sectors. We will continue on unsustainable trajectories, barely meeting current needs and accumulating impossible liabilities for the future. It wouldn't require legislation, but it would release a quiet revolution with profound consequences, not just for today, but for years to come. And then whilst we're at it on the spending rules, let's start treating early action as an investment, just like capital investment now may seem like a rather geeky detail in the bureaucratic plumbing, but potentially also transformational. Last year we asked Margaret Hodge to involve the Public Accounts Committee in the early action agenda. We were very pleased this was taken forward with the National Audit Office review, landscape review, and pleased also to see colleagues from the National Audit Office here today. The review process begins the serious analysis we must have at the heart of government to drive structural change. Pleased also to see many colleagues from local authorities, police, Welsh Government, working in local communities. And that really takes me to the second big theme. We feel that we must stop dancing around this question of silos which governments have repeatedly revisited with scattered pilots. It often feels countercultural for me to say this, but I do absolutely believe that we could be delivering better locally for less money if we reconfigured the ways in which we do it. We need integrated working, we need whole system reform. The task force suggests that either government gets tough on this agenda, we recommend duty for local authorities to collaborate, and in case the local authority doesn't, a matching right for another partner to step up and lead, so driving the reconfiguring of local roles, or we will witness the continuous salami slicing until there's no salami left. We have to be bolder on this agenda. And finally, if we are to seriously involve the third sector in all this, we need to find ways of releasing new money. money for transition. We make several suggestions. Here's two very quickly. First, a grand bargain. When the grant seeker asks for funding to meet need, the grant maker should offer 25% more. First to meet that need, then to reduce it. That or nothing. Second, we should look at earmarking money for a new dedicated fund that pays and only pays for transition. No delivery organisation can turn on a sixpence, but with investment we can buy time, and with time we can change. We've made lots of good progress on this agenda with funders this year. Ambreen's going to talk in a moment about Big Lottery's evolving programme, placing greater emphasis on early action. In the report we talk about some other funders' work in this area. And we have begun to gather a group of funders around these ideas, particularly the idea of the transition fund. We would warmly welcome more. So, supporting colleagues in the implementation of these various recommendations will be priorities for the task force as we move into our second phase, when we want to do 3 jobs in 3 years. 1, bang the drum, gathering experience of early action to change the national conversation, sharing that learning with policymakers and practitioners. 2, fixing the plumbing, tackling those cultural and structural barriers with the systemic change that I've been talking about. And 3, embedding the change, informing, supporting, inspiring sustainable shift to earlier action by working with some of the case makers we talk about in the report and we gather on the way, developing the fund, extending the network. Ask any politician to list the nation's proudest achievements in recent years. Almost certainly the 2012 Olympics would feature close to the top. That wasn't achieved by one government in one term. It was a 15-year commitment, honoured and delivered by successive governments and local administrations and other partners. Couldn't have happened in any other way. Youth offending costs the nation as much as the Olympic Games cost every year, £11 billion. Successive programmes have shown how costs, social and financial, could be significantly reduced with earlier action. Yet year after year, the majority of the budget is spent on imprisonment, less than 10% on prevention. That's just one challenge that can be met with can only be met with long-term collaboration, sustained commitment to earlier action. There are many more. Our recommendations are practical and pragmatic, but they call for a different kind of politics. One that values sustainable solutions above short-term goals. And a different kind of leadership. One that builds on common sense. Understand this and grip the challenge. And in coming years, there'll be more to make us proud than one glorious summer. This truly is the deciding time for us all. And so here's my takeaway challenge to you. Make a first attempt at a 10-year test for your organisation, your department, on the journey back. How will our work look in 10 years' time? Will it have reduced need, or will it have stored it up? Then arrange half an hour next week to discuss it with a colleague. So we all begin the change that we need. A change that is thoughtful, rigorous, sustained and ambitious. A measured revolution, but a revolution nonetheless.